Captain Maya Rodriguez saved 247 lives with dead engines and her sister's voice in her ear. But what nobody expected was that the same people who mocked her promotion would later kneel before her heroism, begging forgiveness for years of discrimination that nearly cost hundreds of innocent lives. 3 months ago, the military aviation world was shaken when Commander Maya Rodriguez became the youngest Latina squadron leader in Air Force history. The appointment triggered a wave of ridicule from veteran pilots, who whispered she was just another diversity hire, a brilliant pilot reduced to a checkbox in some bureaucrat's equality report. What they didn't know was that their prejudice would soon be exposed in the most dramatic way imaginable. 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, Maya had spent 15 years proving herself in a world designed to exclude women like her. Born in East LA to immigrant parents who cleaned office buildings at night, she earned her wings through pure determination, graduating top of her class from the Air Force Academy despite instructors who questioned whether her kind belonged in cockpits. Every promotion was met with whispers, every achievement diminished by those who refused to see past her gender and heritage. But destiny was preparing the ultimate test. On that fateful Tuesday morning, Flight 447, a routine passenger transport carrying military families, would face catastrophic engine failure over shark-infested waters. With all systems dead and 247 souls aboard, including her own sister, Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez, Maya would have exactly 8 minutes to prove that leadership isn't about the color of your skin or your gender, it's about the steel in your spine when death comes calling. The same officers who laughed at her promotion ceremony were about to witness a miracle that would redefine heroism itself. Because when engines fail and hope dies, only the truly extraordinary rise above the impossible. If you believe that courage has no color and leadership knows no gender, smash that like button right now. Comment justice served if you're ready to see how discrimination was crushed by pure heroism. Subscribe because what happens next will restore your faith in human greatness and show you why underestimating someone because of who they are is the deadliest mistake you can make. This story will shatter every prejudice you thought was justified. But to understand how one woman's moment of impossible heroism silenced an entire generation of doubters, I need to take you back to where it all began. Maya Rodriguez's journey to squadron leader began in the most unlikely place, watching planes from the roof of her family's cramped apartment in East Los Angeles. While other kids played with toys, 8-year-old Maya tracked flight patterns, memorizing tail numbers and dreaming of cockpits she'd never seen up close. Her father, Eduardo, worked double shifts as a janitor at LAX just to keep food on the table, while her mother, Isabella, cleaned offices until dawn to pay for Maya's school supplies. Mia, planes are for rich people, her father would say, exhausted from another 18-hour day. But Maya's eyes held a fire that poverty couldn't extinguish. She spent afternoons at the local library, devouring aviation manuals and military history, teaching herself aerodynamics while her classmates struggled with basic math. Teachers noticed her exceptional spatial intelligence, but guidance counselors consistently steered her toward realistic careers, nursing, teaching, anything that kept her feet firmly on the ground. The discrimination started early. At 17, when Maya announced her intention to apply to the Air Force Academy, her high school principal actually laughed. "Be realistic, Rodriguez. Girls like you don't become pilots. Maybe try the community college." That night, Maya filled out her application with tears of determination, knowing she'd have to be twice as good to get half the recognition. The academy years were brutal. While her classmates came from military families with connections and inherited confidence, Maya clawed her way through every challenge. Instructors questioned her commitment, suggesting she was taking a spot from a more deserving candidate. Fellow cadets whispered that she'd wash out within months. Another minority recruit who couldn't handle the pressure, but they underestimated the power of someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Maya graduated summa cum laude, earning her wings with flying colors that couldn't be dismissed or diminished. Her first assignment, combat missions in hostile territory, where prejudice meant death for everyone involved. 15 years of excellence followed. Decorated combat veteran, impeccable safety record, mentored to dozens of young pilots who saw in her what she'd never had, someone who looked like them succeeding against impossible odds. When the squadron leader position opened, Maya's qualifications were undeniable, yet the announcement at the promotion ceremony was met with barely concealed resentment. Colonel Bradley Thompson, a 20-year veteran who'd been passed over, muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Guess merit doesn't matter anymore when you check the right boxes." Several pilots nodded in agreement, their respect conditional on assumptions they'd never examined. Maya stood at that podium, accepting her new rank while knowing that half the room saw her as an imposter. What none of them realized was that their prejudice would soon be tested in the most unforgiving classroom of all, a crisis where failure meant death, and only true leadership could save the day. The seeds of the ultimate confrontation had been planted. In just 3 months, those same doubters would face their greatest fear, being wrong about everything they thought they knew about who deserves to lead. Colonel Bradley Thompson represented everything Maya had fought against her entire career. A third-generation military officer from Connecticut old money, Bradley had expected the squadron leader position to fall into his lap like every other promotion in his privileged life. His grandfather was a World War II ace, his father a Pentagon general, and Bradley himself had coasted through 20 years of service on connections rather than competence. The day Maya's promotion was announced, Bradley's carefully constructed worlds cracked in the officers' club that evening. Surrounded by sympathetic colleagues, his true nature emerged. "This is what happens when politics trumps performance," he declared, Bourbon loosening his tongue. They needed their poster girl, and Rodriguez was the only option with the right demographics. Major Patrick Kellerman, a pilot with a mediocre record but impressive prejudices, nodded eagerly. "My cousin at headquarters says it came straight from Washington. Diversity quotas. Pure and simple. They don't care if she can actually lead when the chips are down." The conversation grew uglier with each drink, transforming professional disappointment into something far more sinister. Lieutenant Colonel Janet Morrison, the administrative officer who controlled personnel files and scheduling, became their unlikely ally. A bitter woman who'd watched younger officers advance while she stagnated, Janet saw Maya's success as a personal insult. "I've been tracking her record," she whispered conspiratorially. "Sure, she looks good on paper, but I notice things, small mistakes, hesitation in difficult situations. She's not as perfect as everyone thinks." What they didn't realize was that Janet's observations were filtered through her own resentment. Finding flaws where none existed, her detailed notes, supposedly objective assessments, were actually character assassination disguised as professional evaluation. The conspiracy deepened during weekly informal reviews at Bradley's house. The group expanded to include Captain Rex Murphy, a pilot whose career had stalled due to his own incompetence, but who found comfort in blaming others for his failures. "She's a ticking time bomb," Rex insisted. "Mark my words, when a real crisis hits, she folds, and people will die because we prioritized politics over pilots." Their plan was insidious, not outright sabotage, but systematic undermining. They would question her decisions in meetings, delay implementing her directives, and most dangerously, spread doubt about her capabilities. Among the younger pilots, they convinced themselves they were protecting the squadron from inadequate leadership, but their true motivation was far uglier. Bradley took point as the ringleader, using his family connections to whisper concerns about Maya's appointment to influential contacts at headquarters. "I'm not questioning her personally," he'd say with practiced sincerity, "but the men are concerned. Morale is suffering when leadership appears to be based on demographics rather than demonstrated capability." The group even went so far as to document what they called concerning incidents, routine decisions they reframed as dangerous judgment calls. Standard procedures they portrayed as reckless endangerment. Janet compiled these fabricated reports, building a case for Maya's removal that existed only in their prejudiced imagination. What none of them anticipated was that their greatest test was approaching at 500 miles per hour in 72 hours. Their manufactured concerns about Maya's leadership would collide with reality in the most spectacular way possible. The same people questioning her competence would soon find their own lives depending on the very skills they'd spent months attempting to discredit. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just their prejudice, but their fundamental misunderstanding of what true leadership actually means. The morning of October 15th began like any other, but Bradley Thompson had orchestrated what he believed would be Maya's professional downfall. For weeks, he'd been manipulating flight assignments, deliberately scheduling Maya for the most routine transport missions while reserving the high-profile combat exercises for himself and his allies. "Let's see how the Golden Girl handles taxi service," he'd smirked to his conspirators. Flight 447 was supposed to be the final insult, a simple passenger transport carrying military families from Joint Base Pearl Harbor to Travis Air Force Base in California. Bradley had specifically requested Maya be assigned to what pilots mockingly called the school bus run. In his twisted logic, this mundane assignment would highlight her reduced status, proving to everyone that even command recognized her limitations. What Bradley didn't know was that Carmen Rodriguez, Maya's younger sister and a rising lieutenant in military intelligence, was among the 247 passengers aboard Flight 447. Carmen had been investigating suspicious patterns in military contracts, patterns that might have interested Bradley and his co-conspirators had they known about her work, but their focus was entirely on humiliating Maya. Blind to the larger forces at play, Janet Morrison had done her part perfectly, ensuring that Maya's regular co-pilot was reassigned to a more critical mission, leaving her with Captain Tony Chen, a competent but inexperienced pilot who'd never flown with Maya before. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. Isolate the target, undermine her support system, then wait for the inevitable failure. The conspiracy reached its peak during the pre-flight briefing. Bradley, serving as operations commander, had forgotten to mention severe weather systems developing over the Pacific. Standard protocol required updating flight plans for such conditions, but Bradley's briefing was deliberately incomplete. Simple milk run Rodriguez. Even you can handle this one, he'd said with calculated condescension, his words witnessed by a dozen junior officers. Captain Rex Murphy had spread rumors throughout the base that Maya was getting the easy assignments, because command doesn't trust her with anything important. The psychological pressure was mounting from all sides, designed to make Maya doubt herself just when she needed confidence most. As Flight 447 taxied for takeoff, Bradley and his conspirators gathered in the operations center, smugly satisfied with their handiwork. They'd successfully marginalized the squadron's first Latina leader, relegating her to what they saw as glorified bus driving. Janet Morrison had already begun drafting her objective assessment of Maya's recent performance, a document designed to support a formal complaint about inappropriate leadership appointments. Give it 6 months, Bradley predicted confidently to his allies. She'll crack under the pressure, or make a mistake we can't ignore. Then things can go back to normal. Promotion based on merit, not politics. The irony was devastating. In their determination to prove Maya unworthy of leadership, they'd created the exact conditions that would soon demand the most extraordinary leadership of all. Their manufactured crisis was about to collide with a real one, and their carefully constructed narrative would be shattered by the very reality they'd refused to acknowledge. At 10:47 a.m., Flight 447 lifted off into what appeared to be clear skies. In the operations center, Bradley and his conspirators celebrated their latest victory in their campaign of systematic discrimination. They had no idea they'd just sent 247 innocent people, including Maya's own sister, into the hands of fate, with only the woman they'd spent months undermining standing between survival and catastrophe. The trap they'd set for Maya was about to become their own moment of terrifying truth. At 11:23 a.m., 36 minutes into what should have been a routine 3-hour flight, Captain Tony Chen's voice crackled through Maya's headset with words that changed everything. Commander, we've got catastrophic failure in both engines. Oil pressure dropping to 0 across all systems. Maya's hands moved to the controls with practiced precision, but the aircraft's response told a story that defied belief. They were flying a dead machine. What happened next would later be reconstructed from the flight data recorder, revealing a cascade of mechanical failures so unlikely that investigators would initially suspect sabotage. Both engines had suffered simultaneous bearing failures, a statistical impossibility that occurred once in every 10 million flight hours. The backup hydraulic systems, designed to prevent exactly this scenario, failed within seconds due to a manufacturing defect that had gone undetected through multiple inspections. In the passenger cabin, 247 souls felt the aircraft shudder and begin its inexorable descent toward the Pacific Ocean. Among them, Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez immediately recognized the signs of catastrophic system failure. As military intelligence, she understood that her sister, the woman she'd watched overcome every obstacle life had thrown at her, was now facing the ultimate test of everything she'd ever learned. Maya's training kicked in with mechanical precision. Emergency protocols, practiced thousands of times in simulators, flowed through her mind as she calculated glide ratios, wind patterns, and the terrifying mathematics of controlled flight without power. Tony, get me every airfield within our glide envelope, she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. And patch me through to air traffic control. We need priority vectors and emergency services at whatever field we can reach. But Captain Chen's response revealed the true scope of their crisis. Commander, we're 180 miles from the nearest runway. Our glide ratio won't get us there. We're looking at water landing in heavy seas. The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Water landings in large aircraft had a survival rate that made lottery tickets seem like safe investments. In that moment, Maya experienced something that would later be described by psychologists as hyperlucid crisis consciousness, a state where time seems to slow and every detail becomes crystal clear. She could hear her sister's voice over the passenger intercom, helping to calm panicked families. She could feel the aircraft's sluggish response to her inputs, like flying a refrigerator through molasses, and she could sense something else, an opportunity that existed only in the realm of impossibility. Tony, what's our fuel status? She asked, already knowing the answer would complicate everything. We've got enough weight to punch through the surface like a brick, but maybe enough fuel left for one desperate gambit. Her mind was racing through calculations that no textbook had ever taught, scenarios that existed only in the space between certain death and miraculous survival. Captain Chen looked at her with growing realization. Commander, you're not seriously considering? Maya's eyes met his with the intensity of someone who'd spent a lifetime proving the impossible possible. I'm considering everything, Tony. Every option, every angle, every prayer that might keep 247 people alive today. What Maya didn't know was that her crisis was being monitored in real time by the same operations center where Bradley Thompson and his conspirators had celebrated her assignment to this routine flight. The radio chatter was being broadcast throughout the base, and word was spreading that the diversity hire they'd mocked was now the only thing standing between 247 innocent people and certain death. The awakening was beginning not just for Maya, who was discovering depths of capability she'd never been forced to access, but for everyone who'd questioned whether she belonged in that cockpit. The next few minutes would reveal whether prejudice or competence would determine who lived and who died. As Flight 447 descended through 25,000 feet with dead engines, Maya's mind worked with supernatural clarity. Every second of her 15-year career had prepared her for this moment, not just the technical training, but the psychological resilience forged by years of proving herself to people who'd never wanted her to succeed. Tony, I need you to contact Pearl Harbor Operations immediately. Tell them to patch us through to the Experimental Flight Division. Captain Chin's confusion was evident. Commander, shouldn't we be focusing on emergency landing procedures? But Maya's request wasn't random. It was the product of countless hours studying every aircraft modification, every experimental technique, every innovation that might one day save lives. Trust me, Tony, there's something they need to know about our fuel configuration. What Maya had remembered was a classified modification program she'd helped evaluate 2 years earlier, experimental fuel management systems that allowed for controlled fuel dumping and redistribution in ways that could theoretically alter an aircraft's flight characteristics. The modification had been installed on only 12 aircraft in the entire fleet, and Flight 447 was one of them. Meanwhile, in the Pearl Harbor Operations Center, the radio chatter from Flight 447 was drawing crowds. Bradley Thompson stood frozen, as Maya's voice, calm and authoritative, requested technical specifications that he'd never even heard of. What the hell is she talking about? He muttered to Janet Morrison, who was equally bewildered by the sophisticated technical knowledge flowing from someone they'd dismissed as a diversity hire. The breakthrough came when Maya connected with Dr. Elizabeth Park, the chief engineer of the experimental fuel program. Commander Rodriguez, you're asking about the distributed weight management system. Dr. Park's voice crackled through the radio. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Maya's response sent chills through everyone listening. Doctor, I'm suggesting that if we can redistribute our remaining fuel to specific wing tanks and create controlled asymmetric thrust through differential fuel burns, we might be able to achieve limited directional control. Captain Chen stared at his commander with new understanding. This wasn't just crisis management, this was innovation under impossible pressure. Commander, that's never been tested in actual emergency conditions. The computer models suggested it was theoretically possible, but Maya's interruption was sharp and final. Tony, theoretical is better than impossible, and impossible is what we're facing if we don't try something nobody's ever tried before. What was happening in that cockpit was being recorded by multiple systems, creating a real-time documentation of leadership under ultimate pressure. Every decision, every calculation, every moment of inspired problem-solving was being captured for later analysis. The evidence was mounting that the woman, Bradley Thompson, and his allies had spent months trying to discredit, was demonstrating capabilities they couldn't even comprehend. In the passenger cabin, Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez was organizing families into emergency positions while maintaining communication with her sister through the intercom system. Her military intelligence training allowed her to understand the technical complexity of what Maya was attempting, and she began documenting passenger responses for what she realized might become a historic flight safety study. Dr. Park's voice returned with urgency. Commander, if you're going to attempt fuel redistribution, you need to start immediately. Your altitude and airspeed are approaching minimum parameters for the system to function. Maya's hands moved across controls with the precision of a concert pianist, initiating procedures that existed only in experimental manuals most pilots had never seen. The operations center had gone silent. Bradley Thompson and his conspirators were witnessing something that shattered every assumption they'd made about Maya's capabilities. The woman they'd mocked for getting easy assignments was now attempting aerial maneuvers that the most experienced test pilots had only theorized about. Fuel redistribution initiated, Maya announced. Tony, monitor our role characteristics. If this works, we should start seeing subtle control authority return within 90 seconds. The next minute and a half would determine not just whether 247 people lived or died, but whether everything Maya had endured, every obstacle she'd overcome, had prepared her for this ultimate test of leadership. At 18,000 feet, the impossible began to happen. Maya's experimental fuel redistribution was working. Flight 447 was responding to control inputs that shouldn't have been possible with dead engines. Tony, do you feel that? Maya's voice carried a note of controlled excitement. We've got limited roll authority. Not much, but enough to potentially control our descent angle. What she was achieving defied every aerodynamic principle her critics thought they understood. In the operations center, Colonel Bradley Thompson stood paralyzed as technical experts rushed in to monitor the unfolding miracle. Dr. Park's voice crackled through the speakers. Commander Rodriguez, you're achieving control authority that our computer models said was impossible at your current airspeed. What you're doing is going to rewrite emergency flight procedures. The woman Bradley had dismissed as a diversity hire was literally inventing new ways to save lives. Maya's next decision revealed the depth of her strategic thinking. Tony, I need you to calculate descent profiles for Hickam Field. I know we can't make the runway, but if we can control our glide path, we might be able to ditch in the shallow waters just offshore where rescue teams can reach us. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was orchestrating the most complex emergency landing in aviation history. Captain Chen's hands flew over his instruments, calculating possibilities that hadn't existed 15 minutes earlier. Commander, if we can maintain this level of control, we might actually pull this off. The water depth near Hickam is only 20 feet in some areas, enough to cushion impact but shallow enough for rescue operations. Maya's innovation had transformed certain death into possible survival, but the psychological preparation was equally crucial. Over the intercom, Maya addressed her passengers with the authority of someone who'd spent her entire career earning the right to lead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing a complete engine failure, but I want you to know that we have achieved partial control of the aircraft through emergency procedures. We will be making a water landing near Hickam Field, where rescue teams are already positioning. Her voice was steady, confident, reassuring, the voice of someone who'd been tested by prejudice and emerged stronger. In the passenger cabin, Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez felt a surge of pride watching her sister transform a disaster into a demonstration of extraordinary leadership. This was the woman she'd always known Maya to be, finally revealed to a world that had refused to see in Pearl Harbor operations. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Junior officers who'd whispered about Maya's qualifications now listened in stunned silence as she orchestrated maneuvers that veteran pilots were calling impossible. Major Patrick Kellerman, one of Bradley's co-conspirators, whispered to his colleague, "Jesus Christ, she's actually going to save them all." Maya's final preparation was the most crucial. "Tony, when we hit the water, we'll have approximately 90 seconds before this aircraft becomes uncontrollable. I need you to coordinate with the cabin crew for the fastest passenger evacuation in aviation history. Every second will count." She was planning not just for survival, but for the preservation of every life under her command. The radio chatter revealed the scope of the rescue operation. Maya had triggered Coast Guard helicopters, Navy rescue swimmers, medical teams, and emergency vessels were converging on the shallow waters near Hickam Field. What had begun as routine transport had become the largest air-sea rescue operation in Pacific fleet history. Bradley Thompson realized with growing horror that his campaign to discredit Maya had positioned her for the most public demonstration of leadership possible. Every decision she'd made, every innovation she'd attempted, every life she was about to save would be documented, analyzed, and celebrated. His prejudice had created the perfect stage for her vindication. At 8,000 feet with 5 minutes to impact, Maya keyed her microphone for what might be her final transmission. "Pearl Harbor operations, this is Flight 447. We are committed to water landing. All souls aboard are prepared. Request immediate emergency response at coordinates. I'm transmitting now." The woman they'd tried to diminish was about to become a legend. At 3,000 feet above the Pacific, Maya Rodriguez made contact with the water with the precision of a master craftsman. The fuel redistribution system she'd improvised allowed her to level the aircraft's wings at the critical moment, transforming what should have been a catastrophic crash into a controlled ditching that aviation experts would later call the most skillful emergency landing in modern history. The impact sent shockwaves through the aircraft, but Maya's calculations had been perfect. Flight 447 hit the shallow waters near Hickam Field at precisely the angle and speed that maximized survivability. Water rushed through the fuselage, but the aircraft remained intact long enough for the evacuation procedures Maya and Captain Chen had choreographed during their descent. In the passenger cabin, Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez had organized families into evacuation groups exactly as her sister had instructed. Military passengers assisted civilians, parents secured children, and within 60 seconds of impact, the first life rafts were deployed. The discipline and organization Maya had instilled during those terrifying final minutes was now saving lives with mechanical precision. Coast Guard rescue swimmers were already in the water, having positioned themselves based on Maya's transmitted coordinates. The rescue operation unfolded with unprecedented efficiency because Maya had given them exactly what they needed: precise location, accurate passenger count, and enough advance warning to position resources perfectly. But the real confrontation was happening in the Pearl Harbor Operations Center, where Colonel Bradley Thompson and his conspirators were watching their prejudice collapse in real. Every assumption they'd made about Maya's leadership was being shattered by the evidence of 247 people alive because of her extraordinary competence. The radio chatter told the story. All passengers evacuated safely. Aircraft Commander Maya Rodriguez coordinated the entire operation. No fatalities, minimal injuries. This is being called the miracle of the Pacific. Bradley stood frozen as the woman he'd tried to destroy became the hero of the most dramatic rescue in recent military history. Major Patrick Kellerman, ashen-faced, whispered to his co-conspirator, "She saved everyone. Every single person on that plane is alive because of what she did." The weight of their months-long campaign of discrimination was crushing down on them, as they realized they'd tried to discredit someone whose capabilities far exceeded their own. Janet Morrison, who'd spent weeks documenting fabricated concerns about Maya's leadership, was now watching television news crews arriving to cover the story of the century. The same woman she'd tried to portray as incompetent was being hailed as a genius pilot whose innovation had rewritten the rules of emergency aviation. The final humiliation came when Dr. Elizabeth Park's voice crackled through the operations center speakers. What Commander Rodriguez accomplished today will be studied in flight schools for generations. She took experimental technology and applied it in ways that our best engineers never imagined. This is the kind of leadership that defines excellence in aviation. As rescue helicopters lifted Maya and her crew from the life rafts, television cameras captured the image that would define her legacy, a composed, professional pilot who'd faced the impossible and won. The woman Bradley Thompson had mocked as a diversity hire was now the most celebrated pilot in the Pacific Fleet, but Maya's finest moment came through her radio transmission as she was being lifted to safety. Pearl Harbor operations. This is Commander Rodriguez. Mission accomplished. All 247 souls accounted for, and safe. Flight 447 is terminating flight status. Her voice carried no triumph, no vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of a job done perfectly under impossible circumstances. In the operations center, Bradley Thompson's career was effectively over. His months of discrimination and sabotage had created the perfect conditions for Maya to demonstrate exactly why she deserved every promotion she'd earned. His prejudice had become the instrument of his own destruction. The confrontation was complete. Maya Rodriguez had proven beyond any possible doubt that leadership, courage, and competence have nothing to do with gender, race, or background, and everything to do with the character revealed when everything is on the line. Within 72 hours of the miracle of the Pacific, the investigation into Flight 447's emergency landing revealed far more than mechanical failure. Military investigators, impressed by Maya's performance, began examining the circumstances that had led to her assignment on that particular flight. What they discovered was a pattern of discrimination so systematic and deliberate that it triggered the largest internal affairs investigation in Pacific Fleet history. Janet Morrison's objective assessments were forensically analyzed and found to be fabricated character assassination. Her detailed notes, supposedly documenting Maya's inadequacies, contradicted every official performance metric and flight safety record. When confronted with evidence of her falsified reports, Janet broke down and revealed the entire conspiracy, implicating Bradley Thompson and his network of co-conspirators. Colonel Bradley Thompson's privileged world collapsed in spectacular fashion. The same family connections that had protected him throughout his career now became liabilities as Pentagon officials distanced themselves from his conduct. His grandfather's war hero legacy was tarnished by association with his grandson's prejudice, and his father, the respected general, publicly condemned his son's actions in a statement that made national news. Major Patrick Kellerman and Captain Rex Murphy faced immediate court-martial proceedings. Their documented participation in the conspiracy to undermine Maya's leadership was considered a breach of military honor, so severe that their careers were terminated with dishonor. Rex Murphy, whose incompetence had been masked by his prejudice, was found to have violated multiple military regulations in his efforts to discredit Maya. The psychological impact on the conspirators was devastating. Bradley Thompson, who'd spent months questioning Maya's qualifications, was now facing the reality that she possessed capabilities he couldn't even understand. The woman he'd dismissed as a diversity hire had demonstrated leadership under pressure that would be studied in military academies for decades. But the most profound consequence was the transformation of military aviation culture itself. Maya's innovative fuel redistribution technique was immediately incorporated into emergency procedures worldwide. Her decision-making process during the crisis became required study material for all squadron leaders, creating a lasting legacy that would save countless lives in future emergencies. The 247 passengers of Flight 447 became Maya's most powerful advocates. Military families who'd witnessed her extraordinary leadership wrote letters to Congress, demanding recognition for her heroism. Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez's intelligence report on her sister's performance became a classified document studying leadership excellence under ultimate pressure. Captain Tony Chen, who'd initially questioned Maya's unconventional approaches, requested permanent assignment to her squadron. I learned more about flying and leadership in those 27 minutes than in my entire previous career, he testified during the investigation. Commander Rodriguez didn't just save 247 lives. She showed us what true competence looks like. The media attention was unprecedented. Maya's story became a symbol of merit triumphing over prejudice, inspiring young women and minorities across all military branches. The same television interviews where she'd been dismissed as a diversity hire were now replayed as examples of how bias blinds people to exceptional talent. Most importantly, the systematic changes triggered by the investigation created new protocols for identifying and eliminating discrimination in military promotions. Maya's ordeal became the catalyst for reforms that protected future generations of qualified officers from the prejudice she'd endured. 3 months after the emergency landing, Maya Rodriguez was promoted to full colonel and given command of the Pacific Fleet's premier fighter squadron. The ceremony was attended by every officer who'd previously questioned her qualifications, not to celebrate, but to publicly acknowledge their errors and demonstrate the military's commitment to merit-based leadership. Bradley Thompson was working as a civilian flight instructor at a small airport in Nebraska, his military career destroyed by the same prejudice he'd tried to use against Maya. His story became a cautionary tale about the cost of allowing bias to override evidence. The justice was complete, but Maya's response revealed the grace that had always defined her character. This was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving that when lives are on the line, competence is the only thing that matters. 6 months after the miracle of the Pacific, Colonel Maya Rodriguez stands in her new office overlooking the flight line at Hickam Air Base, watching young pilots prepare for their training missions. The same runways where she once landed a dead aircraft are now home to the Maya Rodriguez Center for Emergency Aviation Innovation, where her fuel redistribution technique is taught to pilots from around the world. Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez, now promoted to captain, serves as the center's chief intelligence analyst, helping develop new protocols that could prevent future aviation emergencies. The sisters who survived that impossible day together now work side by side, their bond strengthened by shared triumph over adversity. "She didn't just save my life," Carmen tells visitors. "She saved everyone's faith in what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations." The transformation extends far beyond individual careers. The Pacific Fleet has become a model for merit advancement. With Maya's leadership philosophy, competence under pressure reveals true character displayed in every squadron ready room. Young officers of all backgrounds now see possibility where previous generations saw barriers. Inspired by a woman who turned prejudice into opportunity for unprecedented excellence, Dr. Elizabeth Park's Research Center has documented 12 successful applications of Maya's emergency fuel redistribution technique, saving over 800 lives in various aviation emergencies worldwide. What began as desperate innovation during 27 minutes of crisis has become standard emergency procedure. Studied in flight schools from West Point to Tokyo. The human cost of prejudice is now quantified in Bradley Thompson's story. Taught in leadership courses as an example of how bias corrupts judgment and destroys careers, his fall from privilege to obscurity serves as a permanent reminder that discrimination ultimately damages those who practice it more than those who endure it. But the most profound transformation is in the hearts of those who witnessed Maya's extraordinary leadership. The 247 passengers of Flight 447 have become ambassadors of merit-based evaluation, sharing their stories of how competence, not demographics, determined who lived and who died that day. Their testimonies have influenced military policy, civilian aviation standards, and leadership development programs across multiple branches of service. Maya's legacy transcends aviation. She's become a symbol of what happens when extraordinary preparation meets impossible circumstances, proving that excellence recognizes no boundaries of race, gender, or background. Her story reminds us that the greatest leaders are forged not in comfort, but in the crucible of adversity, where character is revealed and legends are born. The lesson is universal. Every person dismissed because of who they are rather than what they can achieve represents potential excellence wasted by prejudice. Maya Rodriguez's triumph belongs to everyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they don't belong in rooms where decisions are made and lives are saved. You've witnessed something extraordinary today. The complete destruction of prejudice by the undeniable force of competence under ultimate pressure. If this story restored your faith in human potential and the power of merit over bias, smash that like button and show your support for leaders who earn respect through excellence, not privilege. Comment merit over prejudice if you believe that competence, not demographics, should determine who leads when lives are on the line. Your engagement helps share stories that inspire others to overcome the barriers that others place in their path. Subscribe to join a community that celebrates excellence regardless of where it comes from. When you subscribe, you're supporting more stories of incredible people who shattered expectations and proved that true leadership emerges from character, not circumstances. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their background doesn't determine their potential. Their preparation, character, and willingness to excel under pressure defines what they can achieve. Excellence is the ultimate response to those who question your right to succeed. When you prove your worth through undeniable competence, prejudice becomes powerless and merit becomes unshakable.